Hello everybody and welcome to Wear Many Hats. I've got a really interesting show for you today actually. Very interesting guest. An individual that's worked in senior leadership roles across multiple industries, across procurement, in transformative leadership roles, with a varied career across multiple industries. So we're going to get some really interesting insights here from Chris Moore. Hello, Chris Moore. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you very much. It's a very warm day. That's why I'm also in a shirt this morning.
Well, to be fair, as I said to you, Chris, just because you sent us that email saying I'm going to be casual, I was like, oh yeah, we could do it. Because usually we would be suited and booted.
Right. Okay. Usually. Well, I'm glad I sent the email.
Yeah, thank you. We'll buy you 2 pints at the pub instead of one. Absolute pleasure to have you here, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Should we get straight into it with the first question?
Yeah, let's go into it, no problem.
Yeah. All right, well, nice easy one. Tell us a little bit about your career overall.
My career, well, it goes back a long way, if I'm honest. I won't give you the whole story. I guess it started really after I studied business and marketing, and then really also did some computer studies, but I was really focused later on to get into advertising and marketing. And after getting involved in numerous different roles around promotional activity, market research companies,
right.
I ended up transitioning very much into operational roles behind market research, so working for a pharma company, working for Dun & Bradstreet for data analytics. A lot of that was around the operational gathering of information. I know you're thinking, how does this relate to procurement?
Yeah.
Well, the truth is, after doing that for many years, I think what that gave me was an exposure to lots of third-party organizations, contracts, working with stakeholders in the organizations. And I was actually asked, after about 10 years, I guess, working within that production environment, if I was interested in actually working in procurement and creating a procurement function.
Right.
So that was about 16, 17 years ago now.
Wow.
So that kind of kicked off my involvement in procurement, which I found very interesting. But to be honest, like many people, I don't think anyone really started out with a view of working in procurement. I mean, if I'm honest, the people I've met, especially going back when I first got involved, no one really decided to, yes, I'm going to go become a procurement specialist or a CPO.
You're not the first person to say that to us.
It's always come from a different avenue. So coming across from operations into procurement actually gave me quite a good solid background and exposure to working with suppliers, all the challenges you get from stakeholders as well.
It's quite interesting that, because you would have the people skills associated, so that would give you an additional skill set as associate.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. I think certainly having that interaction of managing teams, managing different challenges in that environment, meant that when I got involved in procurement, I was able to really understand some of the issues that the business was having, and a bit more pragmatic around trying to resolve those issues as well.
Right.
So when I moved into procurement, again, really that transitioned into running procurement departments across EMEA.
Right.
Predominantly initially in the indirect space. So I have touched on FM in that respect, but also, from IT, from professional services, legal services, the whole range of things in the indirect space. I actually got heavily involved in for a number of years.
Right.
And still that's very much focused around what I would say was kind of service-related industries, not manufacturing.
Right.
I got involved in manufacturing much later on when working with Pitney Bowes, for example, or Talis later on as well.
Right.
And I think, as I moved into those roles, they kind of offer different challenges for you as well, as you would expect. I think,
of course,
in the current climate.
Yeah.
But long and short of it was, that was kind of how I went from my initial plans of doing marketing right to end up really in doing the procurement type of roles that I did.
Yeah.
And about 5-6 years ago, maybe slightly more than that actually, I kind of decided to kind of walk away and work for myself. So since then, I've been very much working either on a contractor basis or consultant basis, really going in and doing transformation programs, or actually giving some board advisory support to organizations as well.
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of looking at the background experience that I've had and trying to see how that can hopefully benefit people.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So how do you find the difference? What are the key differences between, having that consultancy or being that consultant as opposed to being directly employed by a company? What do you prefer, I suppose? And how would you? I think,
if I'm honest, I prefer the consultancy. Yeah. And I say that in a way that I've worked for a number of big corporations, and so those corporations have a certain culture and environment which you work within.
Yes.
And they're very challenging, they're very rewarding, but they're also very challenging, I think. So to get some things done, it can be very difficult. Yeah. I think in the consultancy base, really, where people are engaging with your expertise and knowledge, and you're making recommendations, the decision-making side of that really is down to the organisation. So you're doing the evaluation, you're presenting what you think the recommendation should be, and really they're making a decision on what steps they want to take going forward. So the way in which I've tended to work in that capacity has been very much evaluating things, providing recommendations based on what the challenges are to an organisation, and letting the organisation make that decision. So I don't actually have to own it. So for me, that's the big difference that I see. It's quite nice in the sense that you can get heavily involved, but you can also look at it and not have to worry about the politics behind some of those situations that you see in big corporations. So
you kind of get all the benefits, but none of the bureaucracy. I think would that be?
I was trying to be delicate, but I think you stand it up there really. I think, and the
listeners know I'm an northerner. I just come out, I just talk.
And certainly, colleagues who I have worked with over the years, I think have also expressed, who have moved into consultancy type roles, who expressed similar, I think, feelings in terms of the difference between the two organisations, really.
A really interesting thoughts just come into my head, and I'd like to ask you about it, actually. Obviously, post-COVID, the roles of organisations and employees within organisations have somewhat changed. Okay. I've operated predominantly from home for the last 15 years. Okay. And what I'm seeing, or what I'm noticing, is that people that were generally office-based are becoming far more flexible than they were pre-COVID. So I think that the working world, and I'm making an assumption here, Chris, is kind of catching up with what you've been doing for the last 5 years and with what I've been doing in terms of that flexible approach to being able to work. Would you agree, or do you think?
I think I think COVID certainly has forced that change. That change has always been really around pre-COVID. I think the challenge has been, if I'm honest, is that there's obviously a cost in changing that cultural shift in the organisation from working in office to working at home, and how to think about how you police and manage that, etc. as well. COVID forced that issue, I think, on organisations. There was no choice, so they had to move it. So I think what you've now got is the acceptance that actually you can work effectively from home as well as in the office, or a combination of both. I think the challenge you've now got, though, and I think I've seen this with some organisations where they're trying to bring people back into the office, is you do lose the cultural aspect and level of integration that you have with people being face-to-face. So, in procurement, when you're negotiating, it's very different negotiating face-to-face than it is on a conference call where you're not seeing somebody. So again, I think it's the same thing in the office. I do think that's kind of what's missing. So I think it'd be interesting to see what organisations do over the coming years. I think one of the things that relates really much within your space as well is really around the cost of property. Certainly I know companies who had long-term leases where utilisations dropped like below 20%.
Wow!
And it's a case of then what do we do with that? So I think companies are seeing those kind of challenges as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Oh, really? I think that. Those changes, I think that they're going to continue over the next 5 years. I think it's just going to continue because now we're talking about the 4-day week, which I'm a bit like, I don't know about that, but because to me 5 days is 5 days. I mean, everybody finishes early on a Friday anyway, don't they, Chris?
Well, I think not everybody. I mean,
I don't finish early on a Friday.
I think it also depends on different industries work different ways as well. So certainly, I think in certain more perhaps manufacturing-based industries, you might find it's easier to do have the 4-day week and then you have the weekend as well. But I do think there's definitely a shift towards doing that. And if I'm honest, if you look at the recruitment market, a lot of the roles you see being advertised now tend to automatically talk about hybrid roles.
Yes.
And they're quite, they may suggest you are in the office for a couple of days, but generally most of them are offering that. And frankly, I think a lot of people who are candidates are looking now for that to be a requirement as to what type of role they actually take. So I think there's definitely a shift. I think it'll take a while before it kind of balances out, if I'm honest with you. But it is an interesting time.
Yeah, because we've got a lot of the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. I won't say the inaccurate. Guests have already done that on the show, so I don't need to. It's going to be quite interesting how it evolves over time, I think. Thanks, Chris. Really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so what inspired you? I mean, I know you talked a little bit about how you transitioned into procurement, but what inspired you to move from where you were previously into it? Was there a particular incident, or?
So, as I said, I kind of was after transition. There was nothing that really I would say thought, I definitely want to go and do that. What I will say, however, is that it's when I was after look and moving to and create a procurement function, I had to actually understand what exactly does procurement do? Because again, like many people, I had a perception that really it was very much the or the tactical type activity that you see. It was placing purchase orders. It was, checking inventory. So that was, and honestly, that was the assumption I had initially. I think, but once I got into it and realised that procurement is quite a unique function where actually you get access to everything in the organisation.
Yep.
All functions. Work with you get access to financial data across the whole organisation, and you have a whole supply chain. So actually opens up a whole range of things that you can actually do and get involved in. So for me, that's what I found interesting, whether it was working on a new ERP implementation, or whether it was sourcing a new contract with Microsoft or a new building for services. I think that the range of things you could get involved in is what made it genuinely interesting, which you don't tend to get in most other functions. So for me, I wouldn't say I was inspired, but certainly I thought, well, actually, there's a lot of things here that you really get your teeth into that are really interesting and challenging in a completely different way than you would typically have thought. Yeah. So I think that's really what kind of got me kind of interested more and more into procurement. And actually, that's one reason why I went and did my M6 and got certified, because actually opened a whole host of other doors, I think, for me in that sense as well.
So that kind of develops you as an individual into other areas of business that you were interested in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, again, things like getting involved in IT and technology, or getting involved in, we talked about the people side where you're looking at recruitment or HR services. When you're buying those services, you naturally have to understand how they're going to be used. That's true. How does the organisation benefit from them? So I think your level of involvement is much greater in that area. So for me personally, I found that really interesting, challenging. There are obviously some areas I wasn't as interested in. I won't mention those. Yeah. But but majority of things I think generally I found interesting and got my teeth into.
Okay.
And even as I progressed in my career, there are areas I always kind of kept myself involved with, whether it was IT or professional services, things I like to kind of get involved in, I continue to do as well.
Yeah. So how would you say that you feel procurement has evolved in the 17, 18 years that you've been operating in it? Because I kind of think now it's really sharp. It's very well done. It's very.
I think it's evolved greatly. I think when I sometimes talk about procurement and I go into explain what procurement is, I sometimes always compare, to definition of purchasing versus procurement. And for me, if you go back 20 years ago, a lot of people's view was really it was tactical. It was purchasing. It was that process and activity you embodied. Now, I think the focus is actually, and you've seen this particularly out of the events of the last couple of years, where you've got disruption to supply chains, you've got economic challenges. You find actually it's become a lot more strategic. Involved in supply due diligence, risk management. So I think that change from that tactical to that kind of more forward-focused activity is what I think I've seen in procurement. So that's translated into how organisations structure themselves, the skills that you bring into those functions, but also the level of knowledge that you have now within the markets that the commodity markets, those functions support as well. So I think I've seen a change in that. The other thing I would say as well is technology.
Oh, of course,
the way in which we managed processing now to what we do now is completely different. And I think that's going to continue to change, with things like AI, et cetera, coming in as well.
We are going to talk about that shortly. Yeah.
So I think there's been a dramatic move, I think, in terms of how the functions are, actually managed themselves. How the business sees them. I think there are still challenges in terms of the perception of procurement. And I think that also varies from sector to sector in terms of how reliant the businesses are on procurement as a function. But I think in the future, you will see even more change. And I do think particularly with what's happened in the past couple of years, procurement, and I've been there myself, fighting to get a seat around the table. I think now with what's happened, I think the status of procurement has been elevated where it's becoming far more involved in those business decisions that need to be taken because of what you've seen with the supply chains through COVID, through the economic challenges we currently have. I think people are now looking to them as the face to our supply chain. How do you secure supply? How do you secure pricing? So I think it's and also if you look at things like ESG, I know you're going to go on later on as well. But again, ESG again is something that procurement again are getting heavily involved in to manage and police with the supply chain. So I think it's opened up a whole area for procurement going forward.
Yeah, so it's become a far more interesting and dynamic function.
I think it has very much more now. I think it's also going to attract more and more people from within the organisation to want to move into it. What I would say as well, actually, I think is equally people will move from procurement with, I think, a solid knowledge base into other areas of the business as well. Is that what you'll start to see also?
Okay. So sort of staying with that, what advice would you give to an individual that was looking to move into procurement?
I think the key thing I would probably say is to understand what procurement represents. And as I mentioned earlier on, I think because there are so many facets of procurement now, you can get involved in from, the market and commodity aspects of managing the category, contract management, the technology piece, the data analytics. There's so much you can get involved in. I think the perception years ago about what a buyer is and what someone now is a procurement is quite different. So I do think someone looking at procurement now really should be looking at saying, what is it that interests me?
Yeah.
But also recognise, actually, you can build a career on just one facet of procurement. So the analytics side alone, if you look at what's happening right now, the information you were trying to gather, and you're trying to analyse whether it's spend information, supply information.
Everything's about data.
Everything's about data.
Yeah.
So I think the advice I would was to look at it, see what really interests you, but also recognise that, there are a whole range of areas that you can tap into procurement. Yeah. Also, I think the way in is not the same now as it perhaps used to be, where you went in as a buyer, a category manager, and you went. So I actually think the entrances into procurement as a function, you can come in many different ways now.
Right.
So that's also, I think, interesting for someone looking at procurement as well.
Yeah, that is quite interesting. To be fair, that people can come via different avenues to build it. Because I think if you're going to be a data-driven individual, it's a certain type of person that can do that, isn't it?
It is.
Really is.
Yeah, and I think the way in which you look at demands that you put on data and procurement now as well, you really need people who understand the data and the information, the data sources.
Yep.
And we are making decisions based on that data.
Yep.
So I do think it's key that someone who has that kind of background may find it very interesting in terms of what else they get exposed to within the procurement environment.
Yeah.
In the same way, someone who's familiar with procurement and works, say, within the supply chain, supply due diligence or contract management, might find actually they can move into a business development role or a sales role because they have the understanding.
I know people that have done that. Right. I do know people that have moved from procurement to sales, which seems like a really unusual step for me, but it proved to be quite successful. So fair play to them,
But I just think that as things change, you're going to see more and more of that. I think.
Yeah.
And also, I think from the current point of role, I think there's a change where procurement roles are becoming organised to try and get procurement roles more integrated in businesses, in business lines. I think that's the move you're going to see. So I think the lines become slightly more blurred. Right. I think moving forward, and then certainly in the roles that I've had, I've worked with people who actually kind of sit on the fence between the stakeholder group and procurement and kind of play that very, very well to make sure that the requirements are fully understood and are very pragmatic in how things are delivered from procurement function. I think the days where procurement,
so a multifaceted approach.
Oh, absolutely. I think the days where procurement used to be, it's only one way. This is the supply you're going to have.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do, and that's the process you go through. I think while there are some organisations still work that way, there's definitely a shift towards actually you need to be pragmatic about the processes and what you do. And everything really is a balance between the benefit that you're giving the business and the risk that you have as well. It's trying to bring the business along with that kind of understanding, I think.
Okay. That's really interesting. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris. All right. AI. Let's get on to it. How do you think AI will affect procurement? If at all, because I love people's answers to this question. It's one of my favourite ones.
So, funny enough, I was actually on a AR conference any other week.
Oh, were you?
So which I did find very interesting, specifically about procurement as it has it, and it was very interesting. It kind of reinforced some of the thoughts that I had as well. I do think AI, can have a significant impact on procurement and how the procurement processes work, but also how decisions are taken. And by that, I mean, AI to me is basically a tool. Any other tool we have, whether it's ERP tool, it's an analytics tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool basically. It depends on how you use it. But I do think the big benefit with AI is that if you have the right infrastructure for AI, it allows you to ask a question of something and get an answer.
Yes.
So where traditionally in the procurement, if you're looking at, for example, a procurement challenge would be, what commodity group should I focus on? You'd go out and you would conduct, analysis. You'll get lots of different data inputs. You'll come together. Someone will present it to you and say, "Here's my recommendations." That could take weeks in some instances.
Yeah.
The advantage with AI is that actually you can ask the question, you can get initial responses. So actually, based on all these data inputs, you should focus on this particular area.
Yeah.
So I think it circumvents all that activity that you would. So I do think, from that sense, if it's used in the right way, it allows you to do a lot more for a lot less effort, or get you to a point where you make a decision without the level of effort you were previously engaged in.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I think it's quite fundamental. But again, I do see it as a tool, like anything else. I think the fear that people have with AI is, we've all seen Terminator, okay? We've all seen the films. I think that's the fear. And I think there's also a fear, and a genuine one, that people think, AI will replace me and take my job.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you that, because is there a scenario whereby roles within procurement that are data driven, for example, analytical roles, are done in the future by AI? Is that something that could potentially happen?
I think AI will certainly. I see it as a tool that will enhance how people perform.
Yeah.
So yes, there may be elements that you might actually, if you've got processes that are done manually now, AI or automation will replace them.
Yeah.
But frankly, I think that's always going to come along anyway at some point. And if that is the case, you'd always say, well, why aren't you automating it anyway?
Yeah.
So I think what I would say, though, is that while there's that fear, we should be looking to embrace, well, how do we use AI so enable me to do more with less time? So, for example,
so it's more about being efficient.
I think it's more efficient. I think it's also a case. So bear in mind also, AI's limitation will still be on the data sources that it has.
That's true.
So for me, I would never look to AI to be a decision maker in areas that may have high risk, or I wouldn't look at it from helping us in that respect. But I do think taking you to a point where you can make a decision or a recommendation, I think AI will be invaluable. So things like conducting an RFQ, responding to supplier.
That's already happening.
Right.
I was literally talking to somebody today, Chris, that told me about a piece of software that can basically do a bid for you from start to finish in about an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have the details. I don't know if it can read specific questions and things like that, but it can fundamentally write. And you're like, wow.
Yeah. But even if you think when someone queries an RFQ and they have a question back to you, that response can actually be driven by AI. So it's a simple question; it can be driven by AI. So I think that also makes the process, a lot more efficient.
Yeah.
The decision at the end of the recommendation, I think, still comes down to a decision-making process you would have now. I don't really see that would change.
Yeah.
But I think, again, the limitations will be really around the data inputs that you have with AI to enable it to work in such an effective way.
Yeah,
if you use Chat GPT currently, and you
I've played with it.
Right,
you love it, don't you? Think
you love it. So there are things where actually you get responses that say, yeah, that's bang on. Other responses, you think, I'm not quite sure where that's come from. Yeah. So it's much the same thing. If it has actually the right data sources, I think how good that is depends on how well you feed that.
It's really interesting.
So I think the limits of organisation will be whether they have that infrastructure to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
I think. But as an individual, I think, we should embrace it in a way that says it allows us to do our job better. I mean, I have answered this before with someone, actually, and I reference this to the smartphone.
Yeah.
And so basically it's like when the big technological change, when the smartphone came in, people suddenly thought, oh my God, what does that mean? We can do everything with the smartphone. You can order takeaways, you can make bookings, you can approve things, all those things became great. It didn't remove people from jobs and organisations who were doing things.
Very true, yeah.
What it allowed us to do was do a lot more efficiently.
Yes.
And so I think when we look at AI, we've got to think about it in those same terms. How do we use it to our benefit rather than our detriment in some respects, really. So I think, sorry, go back, long answer. Answer your question.
No, but a very interesting answer. Really interesting. Honestly, Chris, very interesting. Because, all I'm thinking right now is we could have a scenario whereby, an organisation could send out an RFQ, for example. The individual reads the RFQ, puts it through AI. AI comes up with a bunch of questions. Those questions get sent to the supplier. The supplier's AI answers the question. And then, it could just be, it's quite interesting.
Which is why you kind of need somebody. Because again, I think what you have to bear in mind.
Checks and balances within
you have to have that. I think that, what you have to recognise is, with things like AI, it's very black and white. And my other perhaps analogy will be something like email versus face-to-face. So if you read an email from somebody, you get one interpretation.
Yes.
If someone was to sit there in front of you and read it to you, quite often you'll get a different interpretation. So I look at AI in that respect. That actually, while it can do part of that process,
Yeah.
your decision making is often based on how you interact with somebody as well.
But that is a great way to view it, because we all interpret things differently.
Correct.
We all interpret the world around us differently. So that, because I'll read an email from an individual and go, "How dare they speak to me like that?" You could read it and go, "What's wrong? It's fine."
Exactly.
It is true, isn't it?
It is very much so.
Okay, well, that was incredibly interesting. That really, really interesting. So moving on to something else that we spoke about earlier. In your opinion, how do you think environmental, social, and governance issues will impact procurement decisions in the future?
Well, I think we're seeing it impact procurement decision making now.
I would agree.
I think effectively. I think what you've got is it's interesting again, because I think priorities do change. I think the priority for, let's say, sustainability, should we say, has changed over the past 5 years or so. I think if I go back again pre-COVID, it was very much that's where we need to actually be. Yeah. I think what's happened is people often saw it as a nice to have. I think it's moved towards now there are regulations that you have to abide by. Yeah. So I think that applies to the top. Was it 1,300 organised companies? I think I'm trying to think of limitations that have to report on it. But so I think the element that says they have to embed there. So what I think you're seeing is that organisations are now embedding that within their strategies. And if there's a legal requirement, then I think as we go through the procurement process, there has to be part of our decision-making criteria. You can't not have it in there. So I do think you're going to see that happening more and more. We have regulations out now. I think they will continue to be, extended across other organisations, the smaller organisations. I also think the fact that, customers now are demanding it.
Yes.
I mean, if I think back to, supply chains I've worked within, I've often had clients who are demanding, so what is the carbon emissions for your supply chain? And what are you doing about other aspects within modern slavery, whatever else it might actually be? All those things now, customers are demanding, but they want to see what you are doing. So I think as a result, in a procurement role, you have to give consideration to that. I think when you are looking to source suppliers, when you are reviewing, managing suppliers, when you look at their performance, I think a lot of those things now become part of their ongoing metrics and reviews that you'd normally have. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. The challenge, I think, and this may be a bit of a controversial one, would you really be like anything else? Right now, I think there's an element that might suggest that some people go through the motions to abide by a requirement. So yes, we have a program, and we tick a box. The role procurement has to make sure is that a legitimate program.
Yes.
So how far do you go to identify, yes, that is a legitimate program. It's not just a tick box. And I was in an organisation some time ago, I will say, where we had that discussion around elements around, well, let's just tick the box and say we are doing something and do all the right stuff we should do. But actually, when you drill down, it's, well, how far do you go with that? So while you may be meeting minimum standards, I think the demands now are ready to go far beyond that. So I do think what you're going to see is certainly that becoming a bigger part of what procurement does. As long as it's embedded in corporate strategies, it's never going to go away.
No.
And once it becomes a regular requirement, again, it's something you're going to have to actually do.
So how would you, as a procurement professional, view organisations that go above and beyond in those areas?
Well,
get certifications like B Corp and things like that. What would your view be?
I guess that's kind of what I was referring to in terms of how that impacts your decision making. So the balance to me would be if you have organisations who have a very mature, let's say, sustainability program versus someone who doesn't, and they're bidding for the same type of service, and one price is different to the other, what drives your decision? Do you accept a higher price? For a service, knowing that actually that sustainability program is very mature. And in the long term, that may actually help drive greater revenues for you because it's against part of the brand you're trying to put out there as well. Or do you go for, in actual fact, they meet minimum requirements, therefore, we can save our money now. Now, I'm not advocating either one. I'm just,
of course.
I'm just simply saying I think those are kind of the decisions that you're going to find procurement will face depending on the organisation that they are actually in.
Well, all companies will have a different strategy. They'll have a different view on it.
And they will. And I think the current climate where you've got a drive where there are budget constraints, there's a drive to reduce costs. I think that people are going to look all around about, well, how do I actually do that? And this is one that could be on a list of many different things that organisations might well consider.
I mean, I think there's something to be said about doing the right thing for the right reasons.
I totally agree.
On his baseline,
I totally agree. And I do think, again, that's what customers are looking for.
Yeah.
So I think the long-term kind of strategy would certainly be to go down that road.
Yeah.
I think that's actually, my personal view is that's actually the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But equally, in procurement and in many different roles that I've had in organisations, you always get to a decision where you're trying to balance the cost of something versus the immediate benefit.
Of course.
And I'm just saying procurement often do that as they work us through the supply chain.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so what do you think I know that we kind of talked about how procurement changed in the time. What do you think the future looks like for procurement?
I think it's good.
Yeah.
I think it's very good, actually, given the fact that events of the past couple of years has raised the profile for procurement. I think very much so. People are now engaging with them more than perhaps they were done before.
Yeah.
I guess the challenge would be in an environment that's far more volatile and other demands coming through, is whether the modelling that you have traditionally of procurement structures changes.
Yeah.
I mean, businesses generally, look for, I would say, a lot more agility, responsiveness, and how you engage with procurement. So
dynamism.
Yes.
Dynamism.
So I think what you're going to see perhaps is maybe a change in the traditional models that you see in organisations, category strategies and become operations set up. I think you might find there'll be more integration within procurement, with roles being far more integrated within business lines or in other functions. I think to kind of, as I said, blur that gap more.
Yep.
That's what I kind of expect to see typically going forward.
Right.
Equally, I think, I mentioned before about, the challenges in procurement and companies looking for cost reduction. Again, procurement, I think, has to be careful in that where people traditionally measure procurement on cost reduction.
Yep.
And now it's becoming, things like risk management, sustainability, and other areas as well.
Yeah.
What you've got to be careful of is actually that companies continue to see the value procurement has to offer. Because if it's not now in pounds, it's what else is it in? So procurement in itself in the organisation could see themselves under threat because there's a cost associated with running the procurement function. So if you're not getting the true value out of it, I think there's a question mark around why should we have it?
Yeah.
So I think in some respects there's a threat in certain areas, but I think generally my view would be I think it's very positive. Yeah. I do think roles will change. Again, I mentioned before about, for example, AI, data. I think ESG, there'll be other challenges I think procurement will face. Yeah, other skills that are required.
I think in any industry, you just got to be comfortable with change because I've been in business for 20 years, and the one thing that is constant is change. Yeah, I think you have to be able to cope with that, don't you?
I think it's also a big challenge will be, if you look at what's happened the past 2 years again, is that there's so much volatility that now procurement I think will have a role in, I guess, securing those supply chains or supply resilience, I think is the term we should be using. I think very much the focus on how do you do that, how do you manage risk, but also what's the contingency. So things happen like COVID, like the Ukraine war, you have supply chains and inventories that either there is no stock for certain items or your areas are now overstocked because they bought up during those times. So I think you're going to have different challenges we're going to have to face going forward. So I think it's very interesting. I think the landscape will be different. I think the way in which you see procurement now and the way they integrate organisations, I think will be different in the future.
Yeah, I think industry on the whole in 5 years, it'd be interesting in 5 years' time when I'm listening to the podcast from 2023, and what we're talking about now, how that will relate to what's happening in 5 years' time.
Or it could be completely wrong.
Yeah, well, we could be. Yeah, we could be. There could be T1000 running the world, mate.
Exactly.
Who knows?
AI may have taken over.
Yeah, exactly. And we all be put in a box somewhere, giving one meal a day or something like that. Humans will be safe in the boxing eye. Okay. Well, that's a really interesting insight there, Chris. Thank you very much. So, what are the common challenges that you would face in procurement today? What do you find the most challenging in your role on a day-to-day basis?
I think, where I've gone into organisations, the biggest challenge probably has been around the perception of redefining what procurement is.
Yes.
So I think quite often people have a perception of what procurement is and what they want. So it's been often an element of educating individuals about what procurement does and doesn't do.
So it's got a bit of an image problem, would you say?
I think there's a perception issue. There's an image issue. I think, just on that image, how many years ago, just a quick story, I remember going to a conference and what one of the presenters actually did was that he said he Googled at the time, I think, a procurement manager, and what came out was a picture of a middle-aged white man in a tweed jacket and beard, and it was the image. So that's what everyone thinks when they think about procurement,
right?
And I think, and that's part of the branding issue that you can see. People have a view of, well, this is what I think it looks like.
I could see that. I could see that. Yeah.
So I do think that's a challenge. So really trying to say, actually, procurement can be a lot more than this. It can be a lot more than purchase orders. It can be a lot more than what you normally expect to see. Yeah. So I think certainly that's a challenge that I see, trying to educate people and saying, here's what it can actually do for you. Yeah. The other one I think is then having to actually engage people. People don't want to engage with procurement generally. Stakeholder groups tend to want to believe they have a view of what they want. Yeah. And I think I know you can ask me later on, but I can't touch on that. I think what I always have learned is that, when I'm talking to new clients or I'm talking to stakeholder groups, it's quite often, it's never to take for granted that what they want is actually what they need.
Yes.
Or the solution they have in mind is actually the right solution.
Fair comment.
So I do think that quite often there's a challenge around how do you manage that engagement with stakeholders. So from my point of view, a lot of that's trying to break down what is it that you actually need to help you do your job more effectively. Yeah. Is it what you're asking for, or is it actually something different? So the conversation there was so I do enjoy that type of conversation. Yeah. So I think so, so it's that kind of engagement for me, which I think is the biggest challenge. I mean, things like technology, to be honest, different organizations have different levels of technology, but technology is technology. Yeah. For me, it's how do you engage with your stakeholder group? How do you deal with that kind of perception of what procurement actually is? Yeah. I think it's what I personally see as the biggest challenge.
So would you say that's like, you're working collaboratively to make sure that there isn't a them versus us scenario within the organisation?
I think it's certainly trying to break down some of those walls and engage in a way. And it's what I said earlier on about, I think the thing that procurement also needs to recognize, and I personally, I always challenge myself to think this way, is that I don't typically think that organisations do things just to annoy procurement. If processes don't work, then something's wrong with the processes. Yeah. So I do think a lot of the engagement I find myself is trying to understand, so what is it that doesn't work for you? Yeah. And why doesn't it work? Yeah. And quite often it may be that there's a collaboration that's okay, actually, we need to change the process because it's not giving you what you need. So the idea of trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, I remember it's trying to say, actually, let's make that hexagon or something. So how do we change that approach? So I do think, so for me, to really question, really, that's the challenge, I think, is really trying to get down to what was the crux of the problem. Too often, I think it's assumptions are made around, here's what we think the problem to be. My personal way is trying to actually go to that level of evaluation to understand, well, okay, let's take a step back and really drill down to understand what really is the issue. Yeah. I did a lean Sigma course some years ago, and there's something called the 5 why principles? You're familiar with it? Yeah, where you always go why. Yeah. And I kind of had that in the back of my head every time I got asked the question again, and to get to really what was the root cause of an issue. Yes. And then trying to, so I think that's
like a root cause analysis.
Correct. And I think so that to me really is one of the biggest challenges that I tend to find, and the process that I personally go through when I engage.
Okay. All right, Chris. Well, look, you mentioned earlier on in the show that you did an AI course last week. Yeah. How do you go about staying informed about changes and things within the industry? Do you network? Do you go to specific areas?
Yeah, I think I don't do anything revolutionary. I don't do anything else really.
LinkedIn.
I certainly. I'm a SIPS member, so I follow a lot of the papers that are on SIPS. I attend training courses to keep myself familiar with what's going on. I think, I have a network. I attend. There are lots of different groups and magazines that are out there that touch about different topics, whether it's AI, whether it's, the kind of financial challenge we have right now, whether it's issues on shortages in the supply chain. So I tend to generally just try and read up and keep myself informed. I did set myself a challenge, of spending X number of hours a year to try and just do something. I do, and to be fair, this year I haven't been too bad actually. Yeah. I've been doing that, but generally it's that I think just trying to reach out and work with people. Also, contact from the suppliers I've worked with. Quite often I catch and just say, well, so what's happening? In a particular market, what's new? Because again, some of the things that you see in black and white don't always give you the same reflection as when you talk to somebody saying, well, what's it like on the ground? Yeah,
and they put the human element behind it and give you the real story.
There's a human element as well. So I think, there's lots of avenues, I think, right now to try and really, keep yourself involved. The fear, of course, is there's so much information out there.
That's true.
You can get information overload.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think also I would say is probably around it's that not all data sources really have the right level of information that you want. So I think it's trying to recognise what are valid and secure and genuine sources that you want to be looking to get information as well.
Right, okay. So is there any lessons that you've learned in your career through a particularly difficult procurement process, or something that stayed with you?
I think probably what I referred to earlier, why I do the 5 whys, I think is because I certainly have been involved in my years in numerous different projects and programs where sometimes the inclination is take for granted that that someone defines for you what they think the problem is or what the solution is, and you kind of take away and try and address it in that way. And I've learned from that actually not to make, as I said, not to make that assumption, because I have in the past done that, and I've seen and myself been involved in going down a particular route, only to realise actually that wasn't actually the problem in the first place. It was something else. So the kind of lesson I learned is really not to take anything for granted.
Right.
So I do tend to want to question things and do my own level of evaluation. Okay, so I understand why this is a challenge, so I think that's really important, because I think it can be very costly, and you can make particularly where you are working on, say, a program or investing money to develop let's say a technology. If you make the assumption that this is the particular requirement that's needed and it's not, it can impact delays in delivering a solution. It can impact cost.
So it's significantly cost sometimes as well.
So I think it's very important. So for me personally, the lesson I've learned is really I don't take things for granted. Even when I look at analysis and stats, I really want to make sure that I tend to look at more than one area to make sure do those stats add up to what I'm seeing somewhere else to make sure it makes sense.
So would you say that you're quite an analytical person then? Would you say that you're very detail oriented?
I wouldn't. I do like the detail. I think even with working in procurement functions and the roles I've had, I've often, even though I've had more very much strategic roles, I've often liked to get my hands dirty, so I can keep myself honest around. Let's see how it actually works. So I do. I'm not. I wouldn't say I have high analytical skills, so I don't do anything fancy with spreadsheets and things. That's right. But I kind of have an idea of what I think the process needs to be to get to a point that I'm comfortable at. That's personally what I try and do.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. All right then, Chris. Let's talk a little bit about you now.
Right.
What are some of your greatest achievements in your career?
Oh God.
You're bound to have loads.
Well, I think if I look back, there's lots of things that I've been involved in, as most people become involved in, whether it's transformation programs or major negotiations, and there's lots of those which are great. I think, and it's going to sound a little bit of a cliche, I guess, but I think that the biggest thing, if I look back at my career, is where I've led teams. I've always managed to create really good, strong, effective teams. So I think. For me, if I look back, what I'm probably most proud of is, when I've moved on, I've had people who work for me who I've always developed, who've gone on to have really good careers in procurement as well. I've worked really well with, but already created really good dynamic teams. So that's what I think really has been probably the greatest achievement. And I've done that consistently, I think, through the roles that I've been involved in as well. So much as it'd be nice to say, this great transformation program saved $20 million, and there are those things. Don't look, and that's a great measurement, I guess, for success. But actually, none of those things could have been delivered without having a dynamic team, a team that you can rely on and work with. So for me, the camaraderie around working with the right people, the right skill set, and the commitment to me, is what I think probably I would say is my achievement in trying to get the best out of people in those situations.
It's really interesting, because I mean, like I said, we're on episode 29 now, so we've recorded a lot of these episodes, and one of the things, because I'm learning things by doing this, because obviously I'm talking to lots of interesting people, but what I am learning, what's really standing out for me, is that people are most proud of helping other people achieve things. Then I don't think I've had anybody turn around and say, I was well chuffed that I saved the X business £1 million, or anything like that. It doesn't seem to have been, and I think that's really, do you know what? It makes me feel really good.
I think it's, I think as you get into management roles, that really should be your focus.
Yeah.
Because again, the delivery, and from procurement functions that I've run and been involved in, quite often, one of the metrics has been cost reduction. It's always a metric. No matter how much
of course.
it always is. So yes, they're having very successful negotiations, but that's really not a measurement of the success of the team and how the team works and how they respond to markets that change.
Yeah.
So if you think about what we've seen in the past couple of years, having a very strong dynamic team has the ability and the skills to respond to the challenges that arise
of course.
in that situation. It's not then going to be about how much money can I save.
Yes.
It's how do I ensure that we have the right goods, how do we continue our continuation of our business? How do we do that?
Yeah.
So I think that's where the strength actually is.
Yeah.
So I think that people sometimes don't give enough focus on the people side within the organisation. That's my personal view.
If your team doesn't work, then you get nowhere, do you?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's one thing. The human condition. Yeah. Nobody can get anywhere by themselves.
No.
Everybody needs a team working either alongside them or with them to achieve what we. I think if we achieve as a group, we all achieve together.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really, really important. Yeah. Okay, tough question now. Conversely, like that word. Yeah. Any regrets in your career?
Any regrets in my career? I probably do. I just can't think of any on the top of my head. I mean, there's probably going to be decisions that I've taken and done at the time, which later I might have thought, was that the best decision to actually take? I think you all go through that, whether it's invoking a change in the organisation or maybe it's going through negotiation and thinking, well, maybe I could have played that slightly differently.
Yeah,
I think I do look back at the time at things. Okay, what did I do and how could I improve on that?
Yeah.
I think from a general career perspective, I don't think so. I mean, certainly, I made it, and we discussed this before. I made the decision in my career to kind of change my focus to allow me to have more time with my family.
Yeah.
That's something that I don't regret at all.
No,
but no, I don't really can't think that there's out there. I think, I definitely regret not doing something. Okay, maybe I regret not learning a language.
Right.
I was discussing this earlier on. Because certainly in a role that I had where I did actually work with numerous countries in Europe, it was very nice. Everyone spoke English.
Yes. But we're lazy, aren't we? We are. Because our attitude is they all know English. We don't need to.
I think, I think certainly there's elements of maybe, it'd be nice to have done that. But I think as my career has gone, I don't think it's, I look back and say, that definitely was a big mistake. I wish I'd never taken that role or done that job. Yeah. Even where I've taken on quite significant projects that have been very challenging, I've never actually walked to my thought, I wish I'd never done that.
Yeah.
Because I do think that, it's still again, the cliche, it's still a learning experience as you go through those challenges.
Yeah, of course.
I think you still learn and deal with it anyway. There are certainly things that I've had to do, I think, that have been challenging. Now, we talked about transformation programs where you're impacting and changing roles and downsizing organizations or restructuring them. I mean, they are challenging roles to go through and business to be in.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But again, I think, even decisions to do those things, are taken by committee.
Yes,
they're not down on an individual.
It's not one individual.
It's not one individual doing that, and I think that's very important. Those kind of changes, anyway. Yeah. But no, I don't think I have anything that I can think of off the top of my head. The problem, after this, I'm going to think of something. I know.
Yeah, you will do something
right
pop in your head.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm a firm believer. We all make mistakes. We all have regrets. Yeah. They may not stand out at any point, but it's about whether or not you learn from them.
Yeah.
Whether or not that affects your decision making in the future.
Yeah.
Which I think is the key thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you very much, Chris. That's all right. That's all right. Anyway, tell us a little bit about you. We know all about your work.
Yeah.
What about leisure? What gives you the most satisfaction outside of work?
Oh God! I as I get older, I kind of enjoy my time not doing a great deal. If I'm honest with you,
that's us men, isn't it? Just if we can sit on the couch, do nothing.
I think. I guess. I like to. I'm not someone who enjoys DIY or so. I really refrain from that kind of stuff. I do generally keep fit, so cycling, going to the gym, that type of thing. I do. I'm not a huge sports fanatic,
Right.
if I'm honest. I do like my wine, though. I do go out to...
Right.
I do
Red,
like wine.
red or white?
Red.
Red,
Of course.
You can tell I don't know anything about wine, can't you?
I generally, again, now, if I'm on the other thing, I guess really is the way I kind of play my time now is I work and I take on projects and I take time off. Is I do spend a lot of time with my family.
Right.
So I think I mentioned before I've got teenage boys, and I think as teenagers are, they want to spend less time with you. So I try and spend as much time as I can with them now as I possibly can. So I do try and create time to spend at home with the family really more than anything else. So maybe I'm a bit, I don't know, not very exciting, I guess, outside of outside of work.
Well, kids are horrible, aren't they? They spend the first 10 years giving you every disease that they catch in school. They spend the next 8 years not wanting to talk to you. Why do we do it?
I guess the other thing I would say is as well, I guess from a work, I think it's not outside of work, but I do like the idea of looking at new things that are happening. So as you mentioned, like AI, and part of my just being aware of trends that are happening within my area, but generally I like to kind of keep abreast of as well.
Right.
But really, otherwise I'm becoming maybe quite lazy and just
quite chill.
Just chilled and sitting back, relaxing, enjoying the good weather.
Nothing wrong with that if you work hard, Chris. You got to take that time for yourself.
Yeah, I think so.
To be fair.
So I wish I could say I'm a sports fanatic. I follow a great football team or cricket or rugby team. I do, but I don't. I'm not. It doesn't drive me. I'm afraid.
I've literally just got back into fishing.
Okay.
I was a keen fisherman for years until I was about 20, and I've got back into it in the last couple of weeks, actually. He knows because I keep sending him pictures.
Oh, really?
My boy holding little fish. But I'll tell you something, there's nothing more relaxing than sitting on a riverbank in the middle of nowhere, just chilling out, watching the end of a rod to see if it moves. And I forgot how relaxing, honestly I did. I really did. I forgot how relaxing it was and how much I enjoyed it, because I didn't do it literally for about 15 years. But now I'm booking camping weekends away. I'm going away this weekend with a boy. We're going to a place up in Middleton in Teesdale. That's got a river going through it, because he loves it now. He's proper into it.
Well, I think it's nice actually doing that with the son is great, actually. I mean, again, my boys aren't, we do cycling. They're happy to sit down and Xbox that's kind of what it tends to be. But I know I'm afraid I'm probably just quite not very excited in that respect.
No, it sounds exciting. You're probably as knackered as I am, considering you've got 2 kids, Chris. So don't worry.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, Chris. That is today's podcast. Was that painless?
It was painless. It was very interesting. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It was very good. Very good.
I'd like to thank Chris for coming on the podcast today. I found it incredibly interesting. Obviously, talking to Chris about his diverse experience in multiple roles across multiple industries, and I'm sure that all of our listeners will have found it quite insightful and taken something away from today's episode. So, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much.
See you next time.